You don't trust people quickly, not because you can't, because you won't. And that difference between can't and won't is the one nobody around you seems to be able to hold. There is a specific texture to what you do when you meet someone new. You engage, you respond, you carry the conversation, sometimes brilliantly, but you are not open. There is a chamber inside you that does not unlock on the first visit, or the fifth, or sometimes the 15th. And you have watched people, smart people, people you respected, decide that the locked chamber is the problem, rather than understanding that it exists for a reason that has nothing to do with them. You have been called guarded. You have been called cold. Someone who thought they were being kind once told you that you needed to let your walls down. Someone who thought they were being direct told you that your inability to trust was going to isolate you. Someone who thought they were in love with you told you that your distance was a form of cruelty. And the exhausting part, the part that follows you, is that you have spent real time considering whether they were right, not whether you were being cautious, whether you were broken. Culture has a position on this. The position is that openness is health and reservation is fear, that people who give trust freely are brave and people who withhold it are damaged. That vulnerability offered immediately is intimacy, and vulnerability offered slowly is a defense mechanism that needs to be dismantled. That position is wrong, not partially, completely. What you have been calling a flaw is a function. What you have been apologizing for is a filter. And the people who told you something was broken in you were, without knowing it, telling you something far more useful about themselves. We are going to go through exactly why, starting with what this actually costs you before we get to what it actually means. It started early. Not with one event, though there may have been one, but with a pattern of watching the people around you extend trust and then absorbing the cost when that trust was misused. Maybe it was a parent who promised and didn't deliver, so many times that the promise itself became a warning. Maybe it was a friend who turned the things you told them into weapons the moment the friendship fractured. Maybe it was a teacher, a partner, a boss, someone you opened to before you had data, and who used that opening in a way you still haven't entirely resolved. The precise incident matters less than what it installed. What it installed was a decision-making process, one that runs automatically now, one that says, do not move faster than the evidence. By adolescence, this trait had already started to create friction. Other kids formed groups fast, in and out of friendships like changing clothes. You moved slower. You observed longer. You were friendly, but you were not porous. And someone noticed and named it, and the name stuck. Shy, antisocial, weird, difficult. And because you were young, and the people naming you were your entire world, you began to believe that the name was the truth. In early adulthood, the cost changed shape. Now it wasn't about fitting into social groups. Now it was about relationships. Romantic partners who wanted access to you faster than you could verify them. Friends who read your caution as rejection. Workplaces built on fast rapport and performed vulnerability, where the person who didn't immediately share personal information at the team off-site was quietly marked as a problem. The message from every direction was the same: your pace is wrong. And here's the internal monologue you run. The one you have run so many times, it has its own grooves. They seem fine. They seem genuine. Everyone else trusts them. What am I looking for that I'm not finding? Is this just my pattern again? Am I creating distance where there isn't danger? Should I just decide to trust them like a choice? Is that what normal people do? They just decide? Maybe I'm making this harder than it needs to be. Maybe the thing I call caution is actually avoidance. Maybe they're right. Maybe something is wrong with me. That monologue is not self-awareness. That monologue is you having absorbed someone else's framework for what healthy looks like, and then prosecuting yourself inside it. And when you try to suppress the trait, when you decide to trust faster, Open sooner. Give access before you verified. You already know what happens. It works for a moment. You feel lighter, more like the person the culture says you should be. And then the bill comes. The person you rush to trust does something with that trust that confirms what your instinct was already telling you. And you're left not just disappointed, but angry at yourself for overriding the system that was working, because that is what you've been doing. Overriding the system, and then blaming the system when it was actually the override that failed. So the question underneath all of this is not the one you've been asking. The question is not, am I normal? Normal is a statistical average of behaviors, and there is nothing diagnostic about landing outside it. The real question, the one this trait forces, is sharper and more uncomfortable than that. The real question is, if your caution has been correct more often than it has been wrong, why have you spent this long treating it as a defect? Point one, dismantle the label. The word guarded implies a fortress with nothing inside worth protecting, just walls for the sake of walls. The word cold implies an absence of feeling. The word paranoid implies that your perception is divorced from reality. None of these words describe what you actually do. What you actually do is run a verification process. Before granting access, you watch behavior over time. You notice the gap between what people say and what they do. You hold the early information someone gives you about themselves lightly, because you understand correctly that first impressions are performances, not data. You wait for unguarded moments. You wait for stress. You wait for the small inconsistencies that tell you who someone actually is, rather than who they need you to believe they are. This is not a pathology. This is epistemology. This is the correct way to form a belief, by withholding certainty until evidence justifies it. The fact that most people skip this process does not make the process wrong. It makes most people susceptible to a category of mistake you rarely make. Guarded is the wrong word. The right word is rigorous. Point two, the real psychological origin. The clinical narrative around slow trust tends to frame it as wound-derived. You were hurt, so you closed. You experienced betrayal, so you built a system to prevent it from recurring. This narrative is not false. Experience absolutely shapes our calibration, but it is radically incompleteness, and the incompleteness does real damage, because it locates the origin of this trait entirely in damage. It implies that healing the damage would dissolve the trait. And the people who have done significant psychological work, who have processed their histories, and genuinely resolved old pain, often find that they still do not trust quickly, not because the wound is still open, but because the information they gathered through their history confirmed something that was already structurally true about them, that people reveal themselves over time, not up front, and that trust extended before revelation is a bet placed without sufficient odds. The more accurate framing is this: some people have a longer integration window. They need more data points before a pattern becomes legible to them. This is not dysfunction. In cognitive terms, this is a higher threshold for belief formation, and a higher threshold for belief formation produces fewer false positives. You do not rush to conclusions about people. This makes you harder to fool than the alternative. Your slow trust is not the scar tissue from an old wound. It is the architecture of a mind that does not confuse speed for accuracy. Point three, what the judgment reveals. Consider the people who have pushed you to trust faster. Consider what they were actually asking for. Some of them were asking for comfort, because your caution made them feel evaluated, and being evaluated by someone who hasn't yet decided you're safe is uncomfortable. Some of them were asking for access, because people who want to use you need you porous, and a closed system is a system they cannot enter. Some of them were asking for validation, because they trust quickly, and if slow trust is legitimate, then their fast trust looks like recklessness, and they did not want to sit with that. This does not mean everyone who has ever encouraged you to open faster had manipulative intent. Most of them were working from a genuinely held belief that openness is health, but that belief did not come from nowhere. It came from a culture that benefits from porous people. Advertising works better on porous people. Manipulation works better on porous people. Social systems that require fast alignment, political movements, high-control workplaces, certain kinds of relationships, require people who are willing to grant trust before it's been earned. The culture that calls you guarded is neutral. It has an interest in your permeability. The people who judge your caution most harshly are the people who most needed you not to have it. Point 4. The concrete advantage. Here is what your trait actually produces when it is functioning and not suppressed. You are difficult to manipulate, not impossible. Manipulation exists on a spectrum and sophisticated operators can move slowly, but you require a level of sustained consistency that most people who mean you harm cannot maintain, because they need to show you one face consistently over time, and over time, faces slip. You wait for the slip, and when it comes, you have it on record. You do not overextend emotionally. The people who trust quickly experience what might be called emotional debt. They invest feeling into relationships before they have evidence. Those relationships can hold the weight. When those relationships fail, which they do at a high rate, the collapse is catastrophic. You do not go into emotional debt. Your investment tracks your evidence. When something fails, it fails at a stage where your exposure is still manageable. Your trust, when finally extended, is one of the rarest things available to another person. Because the people who know you, who have been inside the process and come out the other side, know exactly what they had to demonstrate to get there. They know your trust is not something you distribute, which means they know what they have. Fast trust is currency that inflates. Slow trust holds its value precisely because it is scarce. The relationships you actually trust are among the most structurally sound relationships in any room you enter. Point 5. Used versus misused. This trait, like any trait, has two versions. The version that operates as designed, and the version that gets distorted by suppression or misdirection. The misused version looks like this. You suppress the try publicly, trying to appear warmer or more open than you are, while the actual verification process runs invisibly and in shame, so you perform trust while not granting it. You say the right things while cataloging the inconsistencies. You feel fraudulent. You eventually either exhaust yourself maintaining the performance or you snap and withdraw entirely, which reads to the people around you as erratic and confirms their belief that something is wrong with you. The used version looks like this. You are transparent about your pace, not apologetic. Transparent. You do not pretend to be open before you are. You do not perform warmth you don't yet feel. You give people accurate information about how you operate, which allows the people who can work with that to stay and the people who cannot to leave before significant investment has been made on either side. You treat your verification process not as a shameful internal mechanism but as a standard, one that you apply consistently and that produces, over time, a life populated with people who have genuinely earned their position in it. The difference between this trait working and this trait failing is whether you are running it openly or running it underground. The language you use about yourself internally is not neutral. When you call yourself guarded, you are accepting a frame that pathologizes caution. When you call yourself closed off, you are borrowing a description that treats openness as the default and your variation as a deviation. That language is not yours. You inherited it from people who needed you to describe yourself that way. Replace it, not with a positive spin. Positive spins are still reactive, still defined in relation to the original criticism. Replace it with accurate language. Language that describes the actual mechanism. Instead of, I have a hard time trusting people. Try, I extend T. Rust proportionally to demonstrated evidence. Instead of, I'm guarded. Try, I have a calibrated intake process. Instead of, I don't open up easily. Try, I grant access incrementally. Try, I grant access incrementally. They are not rewrites designed to make you feel better. They are accurate descriptions of what you actually do. And accuracy is the foundation of all useful self-knowledge. When you describe your own behavior accurately, you stop generating shame around it. Not because you've talked yourself out of the shame, but because the shame was always tied to the inaccurate label, and the accurate label doesn't carry it. The internal language you use to describe yourself is the first environment you inhabit. Build it correctly. Not all environments are equally compatible with how you operate. This is not a personal failure. It is structural. Some environments are designed for fast alignment and performed openness, and in those environments, your trait will be constantly friction-generating. Other environments have a culture of demonstrated reliability, where people earn their place over time and access is given after evidence. In those environments, your trait is not a friction point, it is a shared norm. You need to know the difference, and you need to stop spending disproportionate energy trying to adapt yourself to environments that will never be compatible with your design. High-friction environments for your trait. Social groups built on rapid intimacy and fast emotional disclosure. Workplaces that reward performed enthusiasm and punish reserve. Romantic contexts where early vulnerability is used as a litmus test for interest. Any situation where the entry price is openness before evidence. Compatible environments. Relationships and workplaces where people demonstrate before they expect. Contexts where consistency over time is the currency. Professional environments where results speak louder than rapport. Friendships built on sustained behavior rather than early intensity. You are not going to change your fundamental operating system. So the strategic question is not how to make yourself work in incompatible environments. It is how to spend more of your time in compatible ones. This is not avoidance. This is resource allocation. Spending your entire life in environments that require you to override your own judgment is not growth. It is attrition. Know which rooms your trait thrives in. Then build your life with more of those rooms in it. The next time someone tells you that you're guarded, or cold, or slow to trust, as they will, you need a 2-sentence internal response that you have already prepared. Not a defense, not an explanation. An orientation. Here it is. This person is describing their experience of my pace, not the accuracy of my character. I will note their discomfort and continue operating at the speed my evidence supports. That is it. 2 sentences. The first sentence does something important. It separates their observation from their interpretation. They are correct that you move slowly. They are not correct that slow movement is a flaw. The second sentence does something equally important. It keeps you from capitulating, because the moment you accept someone else's discomfort with your pace as evidence that your pace is wrong, you have handed your operating system over to someone who doesn't understand it. You can say something kind in response. You can acknowledge their experience. You don't have to be a wall in the conversation. But internally, you stay oriented. Their discomfort with your pace is data about their pace, not a verdict on yours. Other people's discomfort with your timeline is not a correction. It is information. Ownership is not pride. Pride is an elevated emotional state. Owner's tip is a settled one. Pride says, I am better because of this. Ownership says, this is how I am built, and I am not interested in arguing about it. The person who has moved into ownership of this trait does not spend significant time defending it, because defense implies that the case against it is still open. The case is not open. The trait has been examined, understood, and accepted, not despite its costs, but with full awareness of them. Yes, it produces friction in certain environments. Yes, it slows the formation of certain relationships. Yes, some people will never be comfortable with it. These are the costs of operating this way, and they have been weighed, and the person in ownership has decided that the alternative, fast trust, high exposure, frequent betrayal, costs more. The mental posture of ownership looks like this. When your trait comes up, when someone notices it, names it, challenges it, There is no spike, no defense, no internal scrambling. There is a stillness, the stillness of someone who has already had the argument with themselves and arrived somewhere stable. You are not trying to convince anyone. You are not trying to change. You are simply operating according to your own verified design. You are not waiting for permission to trust your own judgment. You have already decided. There is a larger pattern here, and it is worth naming directly. You have been measuring yourself against a standard of social health that was constructed around a specific psychological profile, one that is open by default, fast to connect, and emotionally available on demand. That profile is real. Some people operate exactly that way, and they are not performing it. For them, it is natural, but it is not universal. And somewhere along the line, it got elevated from one valid way to operate to the correct way to operate, and every deviation from it became a symptom. You are not a symptom. You are a different design. And the fact that the dominant culture has no flattering language for your design does not make your design inferior. It makes the culture's vocabulary limited. Here is what is actually true about you right now, not what could be true if you did the work, or what was true before things went sideways. What is true now? You have been living with a sophisticated internal system that you have been told to be ashamed of. You have been overriding correct signals because you were taught that the signals themselves were the problem. You have extended trust faster than your evidence warranted on multiple occasions because the pressure to do so was greater than the data telling you not to, and the results confirmed what the data was already saying. You have then blamed yourself for the results rather than the override. You are not broken in the way you have been told. You are broken. You are, if anything, running too accurate a system in an environment that profits from less accurate ones. And here is the final thing. This trait, this specific way of moving through the world, is not separate from who you are. It is not a defense mechanism wrapped around your real self. It is not the armor over the person you would be if you had healed enough. It is part of the architecture. It is connected to the same internal structure that makes you observant, that makes you precise, that makes you someone who cannot easily be moved by performance or flattery. You cannot remove one without altering the others, and the others are not problems. You have spent years trying to fix the part of yourself that was never broken. Caution is not the opposite of trust. It is the prerequisite for trust that lasts.